Hey guys, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Bridget and I create home and DIY content that helps you make your space more unique and more personalized towards you and your needs. I am very excited to show you what we've got in today's video. Let's get started. For today's video, we are going to do some thrift flips. So for those of you who don't know, it's where you go to a thrift store or somewhere with used items, you find some things that are maybe beaten up or just not your style, and you turn them into something beautiful and personalized. I think you are going to love what we create today. Let's get going. For our first DIY today, we have a Goodwill find, and if there's one thing you can always count on finding at your local thrift store, it is frames. These are usually pretty expensive when you buy them new, but I have found that if you just go around, bring your measuring tape, double check the measurements, you can find amazing frames for super cheap. So that's what I did at our local Goodwill, and we are going to turn it into something beautiful and customized that fits my boho style. So I was looking for a 14 by 17 sized frame, and I ended up finding this for what would have been $3 at Goodwill, but it was half off of all yellow tags, so it came to a grand total of $1.50. So first I need to just gently kind of budge all these little metal prongs out of the way just so that I can get the artwork that came in there out. I was not a fan of it at all, and I literally bought the frame for something else anyway. So take it all out, there it is, and next up is getting the glass out. Now this is a little bit trickier, so I had to really finagle these a lot more, but eventually I was able to get it. As you can see, the glass on here is pretty gross, but we will clean that up later, so don't worry about it. For now, just set it aside. And now we've got our empty frame here that we can work on. You'll see that it's kind of scuffed up. Nothing really bad texture-wise, but it's just not attractive. Because I really want to make sure that the paint adheres to such a smooth surface, I'm gonna go ahead and start off with a primer layer first. Now a great hack for getting really smooth lines on a surface that has ridges is to take something kind of sturdy like a paint chip right here and set it right up against that edge and hold it nice and tight, and then as you paint it'll kind of act as a barrier, almost like a stencil, to make sure that that paint, or in this case primer, doesn't go beyond that line. I'm going to use the same technique, slowly moving up the edge of the frame until I have got this entire border covered. Now I'm going to just continue that primer along this thicker outer edge, again going all the way around the frame. Using the same technique as before, I'm going to paint this inner band. Now I am purposefully avoiding the actual woven section of the frame because I want to leave that as is, and all the other wood parts will be the sections that I eventually will paint with a color. The paint color I'm using today is called Private Black by Bear, and this is just a sample that I had on hand. I love this shade. It's honestly more of like a charcoal gray than a true black, but it turns out really beautiful on all the projects I use it for. I'm going to go in and cover all these white primed areas with 1 to 2 coats of this dark charcoal paint. Now that that's done, I'm taking this really small detail brush, slightly angled, and I'm carefully cleaning up those inner edges. Again, I don't want to cover the actual woven material, but I do want to cover all other pieces of wood. So here I slowly work my way up, careful to not hit the woven parts. If you do mess up, just wipe it off with your finger while the paint is still wet and you'll be good to go. Now you could leave it as is, but I wanted to add one final touch, so I grabbed some of my favorite rub and buff. This is in the shade Antique Gold. You'll only need just a tiny amount for this whole project. Next, we've got a soft bristle brush. This one's completely dry because the technique we're using is called dry brushing. So as you see, I grab just a little bit on the end of my brush and then I kind of wipe it off. I did this a couple times just so I could get a feel for how quickly the brush picked up the rub and buff. When I'm confident that I've got not too much and not too little, then I will take it and carefully go on the frame. Of course, following the grain here, and I'm slowly moving it, not everywhere, but just little tiny kind of patches and streaks, just to give it kind of an antique, almost aged bronzy look. And here's a close-up view of what I'm talking about, where it just gives it this really subtle, nice kind of glimmer sheen, as compared to the other side, which again, beautiful. Honestly, you could just leave it as is with the charcoal, but I just kind of wanted something a little more fun. Now that the frame is done, I'm just giving the glass one more quick wipe down. I washed it more thoroughly off camera, and I've thrown in this adorable piece of artwork that I found at a local shop here. I love the end result, and you can see how it's just very subtle, but all of a sudden looks much more modern than had I left the whole thing that kind of orangey wooden color. As you may or may not have figured out from my surroundings, I love plants and all things plant-like. So our next project is going to be a kind of unique twist on something that, again, you see a lot at thrift stores. I'm very excited. I won't give you any spoilers, but I think you're going to love it. So a little while back, I found this stool for $5 at the Restore. So it's a place where you can just buy a bunch of stuff from old houses. It's through Habitat for Humanity. But it, as you can see, has a big tear in the top, and I knew that I never wanted it to just be a stool. It's the wrong height, it just wouldn't look good. But I looked at it and decided that I can go ahead and turn this into a nice tall plant stand, one that hopefully my cats cannot jump on. So the first step we're gonna do is to remove this actual cushion seat, because we're gonna be building a new one from scratch, and I am very excited to show you how we pull this off. Step one, of course, is to go in and remove all the screws that are holding the current seat onto the stand. Hold on to the seat because we're actually going to be using it in the next step as a template. Here I'm just tracing around the entire seat. This is so that I can have this size as a reference guide in our next step. Now it's a little faint on camera, but here's the circle that I just traced. Now I'm drawing my custom design. Eventually this is going to be cut out of wood, and I'm going to be staining it and making it look super nice as kind of like a new tabletop. But for now, I'm just choosing the shape I want. For me, I went for something really organic. At the moment, it looks like a sunny side up egg, but I promise in the end, it looks gorgeous. To make things easier for myself, I'm just tracing along that outer edge with a slightly darker black pen so that I can see very clearly what my final result will be as I'm cutting around the border. Now I'm transferring the design to this wood slab that I had on hand. This one I ended up getting for actually only $5 from a guy who was selling his lumber business, but you can go to the hardware store and pick one up for yourself. Choose a thickness that you think would look good, again as like a tabletop. So here I've taped it on and then just carefully tracing around the edge, not worried too much about the green tape that I'm skipping over. I'll go ahead and touch that up in a second. Because my board is so much longer than the design itself, I'm taking my speed square and just making a nice perpendicular line to the edge so that I can saw the piece that I'm actually going to be cutting off before doing my next cut. I'm using my cordless circular saw to cut along that line that we just drew. If you are new to power tools, I highly recommend getting your hands on one of these as a starter. With my board clamps down, I'm using a jigsaw to carefully cut along the line of the design that I drew. Now, just for reference, this video is sped up to 8 times the normal speed, so know that this is a very slow and deliberate process. You'll also want to make sure that the blade you have is intended for wood, and in this case is a fine-tooth one so that you get a very smooth finish. After the border is finished being cut, I'm taking 220 grit sandpaper with my orbital sander just to smooth out the top and the sides. As we work, we want to make sure that we're keeping with the grain as much as possible. You might see that I've got a few little marks from the jigsaw. That's totally fine. We're just going to gently buff them away. You'll see as we go that this smooths out not only the texture of the wood, of course, but also the tone of it, and everything just comes out really clean. Don't forget to give the edges a quick sand as well to round them out really nicely. Here I unclamp my project and I rotate the whole thing. This serves 2 purposes. 1, to make sure I sand the top areas where the clamps previously were, and 2, to make sure that I can get along that other outer edge. When you're satisfied, remove the clamps completely and take a dry cloth to wipe off any excess sawdust. Now we are ready to stain. If you want, you can use a wood conditioner before this step, but I have used this exact board before and I actually prefer it without. So I'm going straight in with the Minwax stain in the color Espresso. This is one of my favorites. It's just a really dark, rich color. I'm also a little weird in that I do not use gloves when I stain. I don't know why, I just don't. But you're welcome to use them if you don't want a color on your fingers for the next few hand washes. The trick with stain is to just make sure that you move quickly. You never want a lot of stain sitting in one area for too long. Obviously the video is sped up at this point, but you can see that I'm carefully moving through and wiping along the grain. I'm purposefully not staining the edges because I'm going to be painting them in the next step, but if you want, you're welcome to carry down the stain as far as you'd like. Just note that it will probably soak in a lot quicker on that raw edge. The stain looks a little splotchy on camera, but I promise in real life it was actually very smooth and even. Now I'm going in with a gold deco art paint. You can grab these at any craft store for around $1 a piece. Painting the outer edge is a very slow and methodical process, so I highly recommend sticking on some music or one of your favorite podcasts and just listening as you go. Lately, I have been loving The Bad Broadcast by Maddie Murphy. She's hilarious, it's entertaining, and it passes the time. I'm very curious, go ahead and comment below, what are your favorite podcasts for driving or just long projects? As you can see, I'm really taking my time along this upper edge. I don't want the paint to bleed over onto the parts of the wood that I have stained. If it does though, wipe it off really quickly and you should be okay. Also, just know that some of the areas where the stain may have leaked down, you might have to paint over a few times. It's totally fine. When the paint has dried, we are ready for the final step of this section, which is to seal everything in place. Just my luck, guys, my camera decided to die about 30 seconds into this clip, but I will describe what I did. So I'm taking this 1-coat polyurethane, giving it a really good stir, and then I will carefully brush it in an even coat along the top and edges of the board. As I'm brushing, I'm gonna make sure that I'm going in the same direction as the grain of the wood. When I'm done, I'll leave this to dry overnight. It's time to work on the base of our plant stand. So here I've got a new piece of that 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm just carefully sanding and kind of buffing away any rough edges that are on here. There's a few spots where the paint was slightly chipped or where it just had a little bit of gunk on it, so I'm just carefully sanding it all away. When the sanding's done, I'm giving it a quick wipe down again with just a dry cloth. This is to remove any of that debris so that it doesn't get stuck on there when we spray paint. I'm giving this base a fresh coat of black spray paint. Now before it was glossy and a little bit beaten up and it just kind of looked like it belonged in a restaurant, but I wanted a much softer look, so I'm going in with a matte black over the entire thing, being really careful to get in all the little crevices. I'm gonna do 2 layers of this, letting it dry in between. When the spray paint is completely dry, I'm just going in here and marking where I'm gonna pre-drill holes to screw this back in place. I like to do this kind of circular motion so that I don't just put a dot there, but I really get the entire border of the hole that I'm going for. You want to be careful when you're pre-drilling that you don't accidentally go too far. So here I'm just measuring down about 3/4 of the way through the wood and then taking a piece of painter's tape and marking on my drill bit exactly where that is, so that as I'm drilling down, I stop when I get to the edge of the tape. Double checking the depth here. Since it looks good, I'm gonna go ahead and pre-drill holes inside those 4 circles that I marked before. The final step on this planter stand is to screw the base back in place. Now guys, I made a rookie mistake. I assumed that the original screws I took out of the seat would be the correct length, when in fact they were a tiny bit too long. I was able to back them back out and fix it, but it would have been way better if I had just double checked and gotten shorter screws in the first place. And here is the final result of my thrifted stool turned planter stand. I am in love with how it turned out. I think this gold edging makes it so unique and classy. Honestly, my favorite thing about thrift flips is that nobody else will have this exact piece in their home. It's completely unique to me. If you watched my last video, you'll also recognize another DIY here. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and check it out. I'll make sure to link it below. If you've made it to the end, thanks for being here with me. I'm so happy that we could try out some new DIY projects together. I really hope these give you ideas for ways that you can find ordinary items that maybe look kind of dingy or just not that exciting at thrift shops and upcycle them into really beautiful, fun things that will be completely unique to you in your home. I hope to see you here again soon. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram. See you next time!